This video is all about importing data into Lexchart to generate an organizational chart automatically. We're going to start small to demonstrate some principles, and then we're going to build to a large, complicated chart with lots more data. Over here on the left, you'll see an outline of what we're going to cover and the order we're going to do it. We're going to start with a simple list and no data, just a list of companies. So we'll come to Import, choose a file, upload that file. And now Lexchart gives us asking what kind of import we want to do. And we're going to say cards only. And then we have just two choices here. Are these cards or data? And in this case, they are cards. These are the actual companies we want to import. And there they are. And we can even give us a title. Now, we have this list of cards. We can even turn off the wrapping. And you might ask why this is useful. We'll show you in just a moment. Let's now import a list of cards with some data about those cards. So this is the data we want to import, and you'll see we just have a list of companies, and we have their type, their jurisdiction. If they're individuals, we have their citizenship, maybe a local name in Spanish or German, Japanese, Chinese, what currency they use, and their tax status. And notice there are lots of blanks, so the data is a little bit messy. It's not going to be a problem. So we'll select Import. And we're going to choose that cards data file. Import that. Now, we're going to choose cards only, but you'll notice that Lexchart is showing the complete spreadsheet with all of the additional columns. And it simply is asking us where this information should go. So the name of the card is the card name here. And then all of these columns are just data about these companies. So we'll simply say all of these are data. And then we're going to choose Import. You might ask why you would import just a list of companies. What this does is allows you to create a structure and experiment with the design of the chart in Lexchart without having to know what the connections are in advance. So for example, you might come to the chart window and select any holding company and then give any holding company some subsidiaries. And we'll give it capital source, and maybe we'll go to capital source and give it the baseline group and Dogwood South, and we'll choose Dogwood North as well, and then we'll go into Dogwood South and make it, give it another parent of Dogwood North. So very quickly we can experiment with a structure, and Lexchart will build that structure over on the side as we use up these cards and create those connections. So again, this is useful if you have a list of companies and you want to experiment with those links and connections and structures. Importing just the cards with some data is a fantastic way to get started and do that. So we've done these two things, a simple list and a list with some data. Now let's import a list with links. Now, this is where Lexchart starts to get a little more complicated, so we're going to start with some really simple data. So here we have a list of what look like 3 companies, but it's actually 2. You'll see any holding company is listed here twice. And we are telling Lexchart who the owner of each of these companies are. Now, in any holding company's case, it has 2 owners, Highland Group and Baseline Group. And the Baseline Group has a single owner of the Evans Family Trust. So what Lexchart is looking for are a series of pairwise or single subsidiary parent relationships, parent-child relationships. So even if you have to duplicate some of those on one side, you just want to keep that simple pairing, take it one link at a time. Who's the parent? Who's the child? Who's the parent? Who's the subsidiary? So, for example, you could take the Baseline Group and give it another parent, or take the Highland group, for example, here, and say another co as an example. And so you've created another set of relationships here. So let's go to Lexchart and see what that import looks like of just those simple links. So here we are again. We're importing the links, and Lexchart is asking which is the parent and which is the subsidiary, or child in this case. So we're going to say these are the children, these go on the bottom, and these are the parents, these go on the top. And when you import a link, you've got to have at least 2 columns, one for the parents, one for the children. And when we import just these links, this is what we get. So you'll see that we have the baseline group and the Highland group owning any holding company, Evans Family Trust owning the baseline group. Very simple structure. It's a visualization of just those 3 links that we were talking about. Now, while we're here, I want to show you that you can change the orientation during that import process really easily. So let's come and import that same data again. And we're back here. Now, the Lexchart will display the header row from your spreadsheet, but you are not bound by that when you import it into Lexchart. So for example, I'm going to make this column the children and this column the parents. And by doing that, I will just completely flip the chart around, as you can see here. So here is any holding company at the top with relationship to the baseline group and the Highland group and Evans Family Trust at the bottom. And depending on your needs, you may want the chart oriented this way. Very easy to do in Lexchart. Just flip which column is the parent and which is the child, and the entire chart will simply be inverted. And we'll just remove that example. So we've covered these links with no data. Now let's import a chart with some link data. And again, we're just going to make this a little more elaborate. We have a few more links and connections. So you'll see Great Newco here, for example, has several parents, each with different ownership interests. Great Newco is also the parent of some other entities here. You'll notice that there are some blanks. So there are some companies that don't have a parent. These will appear at the top of our chart. You'll also notice that the order in the grouping doesn't matter. So Lexchart is simply going to accommodate whatever your data looks like. Great Newco, for example, has another entry down here. So even though it has 3 entries up here with 3 of its parents, it has a 4th parent listed way down here at the bottom. And you'll see that's just not going to matter for Lexchart whatsoever. The format of the data can be whatever you need as well. So some of these percentages are whole numbers, but some have decimals. So whatever value is in here, Lexchart's going to be able to work with that regardless. We're going to come and import. And now we have that 3rd column because our spreadsheet that we were importing had those 3 columns. And we're going to say this is the child, this is the parent. And now here you'll notice these 3 other options. Is this parent data? In other words, is that data that applies to the parents? No. Is this child data? Does it apply to the children in this chart? No. Is it linked data? Yes. It applies to the connection between them. We want to know what share of interest each of those parents has with the children. And so we want to include that. Now, see this share here? So we can change that label. It's the header row that came in from our import. We can change it to something like % if we want. We can also simply remove it, which is what I'm going to do in this particular case. And now we import that data. And we'll switch to elbow connectors. And now we have our chart with all of those values on those lines. And we can use all the formatting and design tools to redesign and modify this. But here we have all that basic structure automatically done. Obviously, there's some places where we need some fine tuning like this to prevent that overlapping. But earlier in the video, we talked about how to make those adjustments. I want to just focus on the import here. So you'll see that all of that happened very fast, even though there were a lot more entities and data about the links and the connections between those entities, and all the data is just there. We have talked about links and link data. Let's now do more of a full-blown chart where we see everything. So here is data you might get from an entity management system or your registered agent that shows lots of data. In this column, we have our child companies. We have the parents of each of those. Same sort of idea here where we have the child might be listed multiple times, or the parent might be multiple times if it has many subsidiaries. The type of legal entity. So this information is actually related to this child column if we want. Could be related to the parent column if we wanted to, not a problem. Same, we have another type field, so you'll see that some of these have 2 bits of type information. So we're going to see what happens with this information, what happens when there are 2 columns with the same label, and we'll take a look at the effect of that in a moment. Title, citizenship, jurisdiction as well, units, local name, currency, and so on. So lots of information in this. You'll notice that the data is also kind of messy. There are many blanks, and that's not going to be a problem for us. So we're going to import that company chart data. And now you'll see that Lexchart is showing us all of the data. And if there were a lot more rows, it would keep on going. So there's really no practical limit to the number of columns that you can have. You just have to decide what to do with those columns. So our first column here is the child column, and then we have the parent column. We'll say that this applies to the child data, and this type field also is child data. Ignore the citizenship information, but we will add the jurisdiction information. We're going to make this link data, and we're going to leave the units here so we can see what it's like when link data has a label on it. And we're going to make the local name part of the child data as well, and we'll do the same here and the same here. So this is the way most spreadsheets with entity data appear, but if one of these columns did apply to the parent here, you could very easily just select the parent data here, and it would insert that information in the parent card. So let's import this and see what Lexchart does with it. And we'll unwrap that, and we'll move to elbow connectors. So a few things I want to point out. One is that our link information has the units on it. Now, this might read awkwardly for you. So units 5 million, what you probably want to say is 5 million shares or 5 million units. So let's select all of the link notes. These things are called link notes, and you'll see that this one got highlighted as well. And we're simply going to flip the position of those 2 things. And so now our chart says 5 million units, 100 units, etc. And again, whether that was shares or percent, it doesn't matter. And you can have as many of those as you want. So we also said that our some of our entities had 2 types. So for example, Novell LLC here, for example, had LLC and type family office. So those 2 different columns got used and inserted in a single entity right here really easily, and Lexchart has no problem with that information. Here's another example. IRA is both an individual from a type perspective, but we might also want to flag that IRA is an accredited investor, and both of those types show up right there. So all that data is automatically imported. Lexchart does the layout of the chart for us using all of its layout AI to design a really clear, readable chart, and we can still use all the formatting settings to do whatever we need to do in the chart. So those are the basics, everything from a very simple list of companies all the way down to a chart like this with lots of data about the companies and lots of data about the lines, really easily in Lexchart. I do want to cover 4 common problems with imports that people encounter. So it's not that Lexchart has a problem, it's just that the data that you might be importing is going to cause unexpected results, and I want to address those. So the first issue is multiple headers in their charts. What do I mean by that? So this is a common example where we have this chart, and so you'll see someone has done something like this, maybe created a nice visual layout, and they want to import this. But if you'll notice, there are actually 2 header rows. Because they're using merge cells to group this and to create some visual distinction here, Lexchart is going to think that this row is the first row of data instead of being the major row to import. So the easy way to fix this is to save a version of your spreadsheet and simply delete that and save it, and then import from here, and Lexchart will see this as the header row, and this is all of the data. So don't try to import a spreadsheet with multiple headers. The first row will be deemed to be the header row and the rest will be data, which is not probably what you want. So remove the extraneous header rows that are there for visual consumption of the spreadsheet and get down to the place where each column has its own header row and its own label. That's problem number 1. Problem number 2 is data as columns. So what do I mean here? Well, in this example, in this spreadsheet, you'll recall from the other ones, we had a list of companies, but it's very common in spreadsheets with folks that have less of a data orientation and are really focused on the visual presentation of this table to do something like this, where they list owners as columns, and they'll call it, owner 1, owner 2, owner 3, and there might be many of those. And you'll notice that this is bad data in the sense that there's this entity, any holding company, has 1 owner and 2 owners, but this one is blank. This one has all 3. Well, what happens if there's a 4th owner and I don't have a column for that? And these other ones probably have owners, but the ownership relationship isn't captured. So when you have data structured this way, where you have these sort of multiple columns that are all sort of referencing back to the same one, you're going to want to change that and get back to a situation where the spreadsheet simply shows each relationship. So instead of those 3 columns, you want 3 rows where there's 1 relationship. So in this example, Great Newco has any holding company as a parent. Great Newco has Frank Founder as a parent. Great Newco has Capital Source as a parent. Those are 3 separate relationships. They're all 3 separate lines of data with their own information. So you'll want to move from data as columns to data as rows and keep those pairwise connections between the parent and child and have as many of them as you need, and Lexchart will handle the deduplication automatically. So data as columns should be data as rows. If you are working with multilingual data most commonly, or you want to add emojis or something like that to your data, then saving the file as UTF-8 is very important. This is my data, and this is Japanese and this is Chinese that I want on my chart. Now, the German and the Spanish are going to come through just fine. They don't require this sort of UTF-8. Many of these languages are double byte languages where the computer needs more space for these characters than European or Romance languages. So the only thing you need to do is save this Excel file as a CSV, which is a comma-separated value file format, .csv, in what's called UTF-8 format. And let me show you what that means. When you come to File, Save As, you have a list of options here. Windows, Macs, Linux machines, most spreadsheet applications, whether it's Google Sheets, Microsoft Excel, Apple Numbers, what have you, allow these choices. So this is a plain comma-separated value spreadsheet, but what you want is the one that says UTF-8, and that will make all the difference. So when you see me import that data, I'm always saving as UTF-8 and not as non-UTF-8. So here's an example. When you don't save as UTF-8, it's going to turn those double byte character languages or emojis or what have you into some other symbol. So in this case, it got rendered as an underline, but it might be some quite unexpected symbols. And when you import that, Lexchart's just going to read these as those single lines. When you do an import with UTF-8 format, you'll see that the Japanese and Chinese come through just fine into Lexchart. So it's completely multilingual. Any language in the world you can support, any emoji, any currency symbol, all of that, provided that CSV file is in UTF-8 format. The final problem that we should talk about, close duplicates. When you are importing data, it's very common to have slight differences in data that to the human eye, especially a legal professional or a financial professional, you know it's the same entity. So let's take this as an example. If we delete the period for any holding company, these three look like three identical companies. We know that it's any holding company, any holding company, any holding company. Lexchart, however, any computer system, is going to treat these two as a duplicate because they're identical, but this one as a separate. Let's see what that looks like. So if we were to import, and we'll choose cards. And what I want to point out is we have any holding co with a period, any holding co with a period, and any holding co with no period. So what do we expect to happen? We expect there to be two any holding co's. Well, a normal person looking at this would expect just one because those are all the same. However, Lexchart is going to think that that missing dot is intentional. And if we use the search panel, you can see it quite clearly. We have any holding co with no period and holding co with a period. So those are treated as two different entities. So when you are working with imported data, and especially when you're repeating entities, strongly recommend using copy and paste to do that, or some sort of copy function rather than retyping, because these small errors can create duplicates in your data that will look like a duplicate to you, but Lexchart will treat them as separate and will import that in the chart, and you can get unexpected results. So those are the four most common problems with imports. They are multiple headers, just remove the duplicates and get down to one header per column. Data as columns, so make sure you're creating those pairwise columns with a parent and child, and each row should have a single parent-child connection in it. Saving the file as a comma-separated value or CSV file in UTF-8 format, particularly for foreign languages or double byte languages, and watching for close duplicates, internal spaces, removing or adding extra dots at the end. Make sure you're using the same spelling, otherwise Lexchart will treat them as separate entities. Other than that, it is very easy to create company charts, even in very elaborate structures like this one in Lexchart.